in an earlier generation of social movements, messages were characterized by what you might call master frames. That is, so for example, in the late 1980s, LGBT movements were very successful in framing LGBT issues as civil rights, right? Effectively using a discourse from the civil rights movements in the West from the 60s and 70s. And that's what you might call a master frame. It is much more difficult to do that now. So I think of Graham Chester's work on who argues that highly mobile, technologically infused movements make it very difficult to keep conceptualizing a social movement as agentically or intentionally developing a single or a durable global frame with which an individual actor or even a small group can sort of align locally. Right? So instead, what they say, and what I think makes sense, is that scholars need to understand how contemporary movements develop multiple frames at micro and meso levels, right? And the potential of these local frames to disrupt, interact with, or displace the broader macro-level global movement frames, right? So going back to a point that you were making in terms of, can one apply the notion of transition to Singapore, right? And the reason that I thought that, well, maybe we should invert that question on its head is precisely this. In what ways can that particular frame of, as a communicative frame, how might that be adapted, transformed, disrupted in a particular locale? Because the likelihood of that happening now is much greater than it used to be. And that's because, the very idea of a master frame in a social movement is much weaker than it used to be, right?